I'm not sharing slides yet. And the reason is because I want to introduce myself. It's funny because, with all of us just in chat boxes and a few avatars, I get to talk to myself in front of a computer, but don't worry, I'm here with you. My name is Thomas Leach. I have a PhD in mathematics, which I got in 2012 from the University of California. From there, I was a assistant professor at the University of Connecticut before moving to NYU to do research in the Center for Data Science there in statistical criminology. And then from there, I had this opportunity to jump. Maybe I should stay sort of in the ivory tower of academia and go to a lab in Princeton that kept doing this statistical criminology, or maybe I should go a little bit into industry. And I did my soul searching, and I thought, maybe I could find a place in between. And so I put in one application outside of a university, and it was here to the New York City Data Science Academy. So all propaganda aside, I made a decision to switch into industry, but in a way that I could still teach and be active in research at the same time. And so I'm here. I like the work we do, but I kind of am hoping, and I'll say this again and again, that no matter what your future holds, or what direction you go, or if this is the last conversation you ever have about data science, you'll be able to take something away from the conversation we have today about starting your first data science project. So with that said, I will do my best to try to look over the chat once in a while, but I might miss it, but I do know that the other, my colleagues that are here will look at the chat and let me know if there's something pressing that I should get to. At least I hope they will. I'll get a nudge and I can stop. So here's the thing. This is going to be a discussion. We're not going to code. This is going to be almost like a soft skills talk, because if you're kind of like me, when I kind of switch positions, or if I want to do something, right? I want to write the next great novel, or I want to create music, or I want to do this. Sometimes we're a little bit paralyzed right at the start, right? It's kind of hard to get out the door. So what today is kind of opening the door so that you can find a step into the room, right? And that's what it will be. I'm happy to answer other more specific technical questions as there's many of you here, so I can't spend all the time on the technical side of things, but I'm happy to answer other softer questions as well. So with that being said, I will for the first time, I suppose, start sharing my screen. And don't let this fool you. We started with the same slide that you started with Melissa, and now I see my colleagues out there. Their eyes are welling with tears as they see that I've changed the entire title of the talk. And the reason is not because
for it though, Thomas. I love this new you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you can tell, Melissa, but I actually tried to position my image so it looks like I'm playing the guitar. Yeah, excellent. So here's the deal. Suppose you had to give a talk. Suppose, Melissa came up to you and said, hey, could you give a talk on how to get started with songwriting? And this is something that I think we can all relate to more, because, we hear songs on the radio, but we don't hear too many, hey, the best data science projects on the radio. It's not typically on your playlists, although it's becoming more popular on podcasts. But nonetheless, I think that we can all sort of have an idea of songwriting as a potential goal. And so, you are still in the right talk if you want to talk about data science. I just want to make this analogy to start with so that we can all get the flavor of the direction that I'm going. And even if you think that there's a different flavor that would work better for you, maybe you can still take something away from this conversation just because, different perspectives help. Okay. So with that being said, suppose I were to ask you, hey, how would you tell your friend to get started with songwriting? And you would think, hey, maybe the right answer is I would tell them to learn how to play scales. And of course, that would take an instrument. And, maybe you shouldn't worry so much about the instrument to start with. Start with any instrument. And by the way, this is the analogy I would use also if you're asking about which language to start with as well, is there are more popular language. Python is probably the most popular one, and I'll talk about this again later. R is also quite popular, in particular amongst the statisticians and people that want to do inferential stuff, but you can kind of consider that the instrument. And maybe you should just learn sort of how to use those well. But that's not really songwriting. That's building up technical skills. Certainly you need technical skills, but it's not necessarily enough. So you might also say, hey, learn scales and learn lyrics. And these are two pieces of this puzzle. This is going reasonably well. You know, I'm becoming a poet that can play scales. This is awesome. But maybe instead we can do something more. We can learn the theory in the background, right? We can learn about how these, you know, the 12 notes in the octave were developed, and they're sort of based on some division of the, you know, the wavelengths of sound. And that's cool. Does it help you write a song? Somewhat, yes, right? Somewhat, you know, the limitations, how to combine things together. Certainly you listen to songs in there, but I have a different suggestion maybe as a starting point. And at least this is the analogy and the conversation that we'll have about data science. And it is the following. You know, if you want to learn to write songs and you kind of never had, you know, gotten your feet wet, the thing I would suggest is to start actively listening to songs, right? Listen to songs, find ones that you like, find ones that challenge you, find ones that you may add a couple more phrases to or take some away, but really focus on how, you know, these songwriters do what you like, do what you don't like, and build a structure for the song. Don't get a song perfect. Don't get paralyzed at the beginning because you don't know how to write a song. Instead, let's say you don't even know how to play an instrument. I think you're still okay. You're still okay. You can still become a songwriter. You know, eventually you'll probably have to learn how to play an instrument or you know, create electronic music. But if you start understanding the meta structure here of song creation, you start understanding what you like and what you don't like, how the pieces fit together, you are still taking steps towards becoming that songwriter. And this is the analogy that I'm going to be using today in data science, right? Is we are going to think about data science as, you know, think about this first project, think about this step forward as a you know, listening to other songs, thinking about how we can add, thinking about what we can learn from them. And this is, you know, I also fear a lot of times we think we lose uniqueness by listening or by standing on the shoulders of others. I mean, first of all, it's a rumor, if you ever heard, that you don't have to stand on the others' shoulders. We all need each other to move along. So this is just one step there. If you want to write a great book, you have to learn some language to write it in for sure, but you also want to think about cool ideas. You can get these other perspectives by looking at multitudes of writing. So don't fear losing your voice by listening to others' voices, right? Just realize that they are helping you find that voice, and that is part of the message here. Okay, so now to make sure that nobody is scared on my team, I'm back to the first slide that we started with, and no more guitar, but I might make a couple analogies still as we go forward. All right, so what will our goals be? What do I hope? Maybe goals or my hopes are the way to title this slide. By the way, I found out how to do Google slide animations with the bullets, so you're going to see a lot of cool fade in bullets on my slides today. So first of all, what I want you to understand, just like I talked about learning to write songs, is everybody, no matter what stage you're at, you can start. You can think about how to do a data science, data analysis type project, even if you don't know which language, even if you don't know, like, even if you haven't been in that world before, you can still start somewhere. And that, I think, is one hugely important lesson. I also want to make sure that you have some hints on where to look for resources to help you start. Like, this is me basically saying, again, with the songwriter analogy, me giving you some playlists so that you can listen to some songs that I think are well curated, that you can listen to get some idea, some perspective on how to think about songwriting, right? And so what are some resources that can help you? One big hint is Google, but what do we even search for on Google? We have a lot of other resources as well that we will cover. And then a third one is when you listen to the song, right? Like when we are looking at a data science project, when we are referring to some external source to motivate us to learn from, it's nice also to have some structure on what to listen for, what to look for, what to read, what to practice, and where to go. And that's going to be different for everybody based on their backgrounds. But a large portion of the talk today is really going to be focused on this brainstorming session that we have together about, what do I do when I'm trying to decide which project to work on? What do I do while I'm knee deep in that project? And then, a step that is too often missed, and maybe one of the most important steps, is how can I potentially reflect on the work that I've done on that project, and what can I learn from it, and where can I apply it, and how can I get better? And then, yeah, so this is as I mentioned before, this is, hopefully one of my personal goals here is that every single person that's in attendance today, no matter what your walk of life is after this, will be able to take away something. Maybe, every single person today is going to go off and become a songwriter. That would be awesome. And I would feel like this was still a huge success of a talk. Okay, so what we will focus on in this next, few slides, or slide animation, if you will, is sort of the meta picture of a data science project. I want to make sure that I don't need you to memorize the picture that I'm about to put on the screen, but rather I want you just to understand that it's somewhat complicated and there's a lot more pieces than what you hear, right? What we hear in the wild, what we hear on the radio, and what the buzzwords, they almost all happen in the bottom right corner where it says modeling, and maybe to the modeling and evaluation stage. And why? So you hear about machine learning, you hear about maybe deep learning, you hear about AI, you hear about these sorts of really fancy algorithms or methods that are put together to create models, or model the human mind, or model, what Amazon should put in front of you to increase click rates by 0.02% and give Jeff Bezos $1,000 more a second, right? Like whatever it is, there's a ton of focus on this modeling part. But I don't think this is necessarily what I want to talk about today. Is the focus is all on that modeling, because that's what you read on Medium articles. That's what you see when you look at code. Well, when you look at some code at least. But instead, I want you to think about why would a model be important in the first place? And sometimes it's not. So if you look on this diagram, there's some broken lines, and the broken lines entering modeling, meaning sometimes you don't even make models. Sometimes in the process, you can bring value with the work you do as a data science professional that doesn't even include all those fancy buzzwords and all the models that you build up. And so here's sort of the pipeline, at least as my mind tells me from my experience and conversation with other industry professionals, is the big block here is the domain need. Like, what is this industry? What does this company need? How can you provide value? How can you create an insight that is actionable, that can bring some sort of value to this particular company? Well, that, of course, that is paramount. That is the big idea. Now, in the talk that's going on today, that domain need is going to be sort of you probably may not be working for a company right now that directs that to you. So this is going to be an area where you learn a lot, because I'll ask you to be creative in it. But being able to take a need, being able to take a perspective, being able to take an objective is probably the correct word, and translate that into a data science task if possible, that right there is a hugely important skill that may or may not involve any modeling, any of those buzzwords. So this is sort of like creating the structure of a song, right? You might know every scale that there has ever been invented in any musical system that has ever been contrived, and still maybe not be able to write a song. But then on the other hand, maybe you don't have as much technical skill, but you understand the structure of songs. You understand what moves or what doesn't move. You understand how to bring value through sound. You will probably end up writing an excellent song without a ton of that technical skill. And this is what I want to point out. The more technical you are, probably the deeper and more rich you might be able to get there, but you can still write a good song. And this is again, just me talking passionately about songwriting, I suppose. And then from there, there's multiple steps. There's getting the data, there's understanding it and exploring it. And even just in that understanding and exploring different data sets, or learning how to combine those different data sets or formatting them, you can learn a lot. And from that bit of learning, you can provide actionable insights even. You might be able to create a dashboard, some sort of web app, so that people can explore those data and find their own insights and whatnot within the company or externally or whatnot. And so there's a huge world here. There's a huge world here that doesn't just involve those buzzwords of modeling. And this is why I think every single person here can start working on a data science project, even if you don't know coding yet. It's because you don't have to jump right to creating these hard-coded models. You can start on these skills that are super marketable, super important, and will make your learning experience richer, because you will understand why you are doing something as opposed to just how to do those keystrokes. Okay. So one point here, the reason that this slide is, I said animated, is because I want to make sure that the data engineering gets some shout out here. There's also some other stuff that's going on in the background, what server you put the stuff on, if you're going to deploy this app, how you do this. So there's a little bit more of the engineering side here. But since we said how to start a data science project, I am neglecting, but I don't want to forget that there are also data engineers out there, and they have a piece of this puzzle too. Okay. So where to start? Where to start is, again, quote unquote, learn a cover song. Look at a project that is already out there, that is open, that you can read about. And the nice thing is now that there is so much resource, and again, that could actually be intimidating because maybe you don't know which resources to grab, but don't worry, I will give you some options. But again, there's so much resource out there online. You can thumb through other projects. You can look through people's code, but you can also look through people's descriptions, some of the meta pictures, some of the overarching goals, the reports that are created from those projects. And then you can think to yourself, hey, which of these sound interesting? Which of these could motivate me to get in, to jump in? Just like if you're listening to songs, which song will I be motivated to learn, right? And then it's not just about, always playing to your strengths, right? Whatever you do, whatever music, sports, whatever you do, when you're practicing, you don't want to just play to your strengths, right? You want to play to your weaknesses so that you kind of can even out those weaknesses with strengths. So you might also ask, this may not spark my interest as much, but maybe it challenges me to develop more. Maybe it challenges me to learn. And that's something also just to consider as you are going through this process in your mind or in practice. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of resources out there. What are some to look at? And the first bullet on here is our own blog. And again, this is not just propaganda, right? This is, I'm wearing my NYC DSA shirt. You probably can't see it because I think it stops around the collar, but I have done my propaganda job. But these are actually good, but they're good for a good reason. And so I want to actually skip to the second and third bullet points before going to that first one. Now, if you have been in a data science conversation before, it's probably true that you may have heard somehow, somewhere, the word Kaggle. Kaggle is a big, not only warehouse of data sets, but they also offer competitions, often with monetary, prizes for the winners of those competitions. And they're usually put on by specific companies or whatnot that want to learn something. You can read about Netflix competition and such. And so Kaggle data sets are one good place to look at. And let me actually share with you the website that I recommend here. So here's what the Kaggle datasets website looks like. And you can go down and you can read about different sort of projects that they have in their datasets. For example, if I chose the first one here, heart disease from UCI, it'll tell you something about the context of the problem, or at least about the data and, some of the inspiration. There's a lot, this section of description changes depending on which project you're looking at. But what's also nice is if you come up to the tabs, you can look at something like notebooks or tasks. But let's look at notebooks here. And these notebooks are great because these are other people's work. These are other people's work that publish out to the wild, right? They say, hey, look, I want to share with you the work that I've done. And so you can choose one of these, and I'm not sure who this author is, but I'm sure they're very happy they're getting this publicity right now. And you can see what they've done, and it provides the code that they use and some of the discussion they have around the code. Now, I like this because it is a good source of data sets, and it's a good source of certain discussions around those data sets. But as I will, as I warn you here, be careful not to fall into the Kaggle pit. And what is the Kaggle pit? One is that it's kind of intimidating to start with Kaggle, because when you go into those notebooks, you go straight into code. And so again, if you're not sure which code to look at, or you're not familiar enough with the code to read through it, it can be a little bit hard to decipher. Some of the notebooks are better marked up than others, and that's excellent. You can be encouraged to read them. But another trouble with the Kaggle mindset, and again, I think Kaggle is a great resource. I'm very thankful to them that they produce so many data sets as open source. But another reason to be a little bit reticent to always recommend Kaggle as the place to go is when you look at how you win a Kaggle competition. Very often it is that you created a model, again, that bottom right corner of that diagram, you created a model that got the highest score on one metric that was chosen by the company or the individuals that put up that competition. This isn't always the case, but this is often the case. And what you leave thinking is that the value of your model is the score you get on it. And there's many different scores, many different metrics, right? It's like, how well did my model do? And there's many ways to test it. You'd imagine, even if you know nothing about the machine learning modeling side of things, you imagine that if you create something that's going to make decisions or is going to help your business, you want to test how well it's doing. And so there has to be ways to gauge how well it's doing. But if you leave believing that a single number, this single score that is an R squared, root mean squared error, if you don't know what those mean, don't worry, but a single score to talk about the complexity of a model, you very often lose out on the fact that that score really does not translate into the value of your model, except typically on Kaggle, where you're trying to win the Kaggle competition. The value of your model might be much improved by, not ignoring, but by reducing that score, but improving sort of the insights that you can make from the model. And that is something that is not so easily seen in the Kaggle data sets. Something else that I would recommend is also do a Google search. And I give you a prompt here: data science applications in blah, right? So in medicine or in marketing or in finance or in healthcare, whatever it might be. And so, if any of you even want to test this out, you could probably just start typing the string, go to Google, type data science applications in, and then it'll try to autofill it. And you'll see a lot of different industries. That's also a good possibility. But again, there are so many resources, you might find yourself a little bit overwhelmed there. And I recommend, if there's a specific industry that you're interested in getting into, that you do this search, that you look out there, you see what's out there. They might have good recommendations for how to direct your education and navigate the data science world. But you're going to fall a lot into the pit of the theory, right? What theory do I need? Do I need to learn about support vector machines to jump into healthcare, for example? Or do I need to learn about Hadoop if I want to work in finance and time series? And the answer is maybe. But again, when you are starting, and that's what this conversation is about, when you are starting, it's easy to become paralyzed when you are overwhelmed. And I fear for the Kaggle data sets and for the Google search, they are excellent resources. I ask you and invite you and encourage you to look at them, but I encourage you not to get paralyzed by being overwhelmed. What instead I encourage you to do, and I'll tell you what, is look at our blog post. Now, I put a link here. Going to the blog post doesn't commit you to anything. You can go there. It is open online. You can read through them and look at you don't have to sign up for a listserv or anything, right? You go to our blog posts and you just read them as if they were Medium or Towards Data Science or our blog posts. And the reason why I suggest ours, say, over Medium or Towards Data Science is one, that they have all been based off of projects that have been vetted by our instructors, but two, for a good reason. I want to show you one blog post here. That's not it there. That was one that I'm an instructor, so I graded this particular one, and it was good. So I thought I would show it to you. But let me tell you why I like these blog posts as well. Because again, if you go to Medium or towards data science, I encourage you to do it. There is a lot of material there, but a lot of it is talking about just technical stuff. How to do this with SQL or create this visualization using Seaborn in Python, right? But hopefully you will notice that in the blog post that you read here, and the way we ask our students to structure their blog posts is to give an overview of the project. And it's not an overview like, hey, I am going to do this in Python. It is, what is the objective? What is the big picture here, right? They are trying to extract insights from the city bike data, and they're doing it because they have a particular impact in mind. What will the impact of their work be? And this is the mentality I would like everybody to sort of get in the mood of going into when they're looking into data science. What is the objective of it, right? And when you're starting, some of the objectives might just be to learn this tool or that tool, and that is perfectly fine. And that is something you can find. Those little technical hints or whatnot can be searched. Stack Overflow or just a Google search can typically give you some of those answers. But what's nice here is that you can read through this, and maybe there's a little piece that you don't understand. Maybe there's a score in there that it talks about, or a SQL query, and you're not quite sure what some of this vocabulary means. But at the end, if it's a well-written blog, then you hopefully leave with some understanding of the big picture of what's happening there. And if you think about that picture I showed you, that's translating a domain need into a data science project. And it even talks about some of the results. You can think about what some of the results do, and then you can think about how they were able to use all these tools that you will eventually be able to build up. How could they use those tools to create an effective data science project, which then has an impact in a particular industry, company, field, direction, whatever it is, that lets you see a bigger picture. And so you come through the blog post and you're like, okay, this is good. And not all blog posts are created equally, not on our site either. And so you might have to shuffle through a few until you find one that speaks to you. That's perfectly fine. But what else is nice is a lot of them, again, not all of them. And, I have to make a hit list of students that I need to talk to, but a lot of them have links to their repositories of code. So if I click on their link to their repository, I can actually go in there and I can see their code. And this one is nicely documented because they have the same README here that they basically had on the blog post. You can come in and you can look at their particular scripts. You can look at how it's going along. And so, one nice thing is you can start with understanding the big picture, understanding how to get into data science. And this is, again, listening to songs, right? This is listening to different songs, listening to their structure, understanding how to create a song before going into the tools. But once you want to get into those tools, you can do that by looking at these repositories of codes that are given by our blog posts or other blog posts if they have these links as well. Again, I'm biased because I really like our blog posts because since I've been an instructor there, I've been helping our students try to develop them nicely. So I feel like there are a slight cut above the rest. But again, if you find a different source that you like a lot, that's great. But before you do that, let's, or when you do that, or after you do that, what it might be is let's think about what questions we might want to ask here. And by the way, I live in New York and I have an apartment by the window. So every so often, like right now, you'll hear a motorcycle go by, a siren go by. So it's just proof that I'm actually live broadcasting from New York. Okay, so let's think about some pre-project questions. Let's say you have been sold by my, you're buying what I'm selling basically here, right? Which is you can do a data science project even if you don't know the coding yet. Okay, you buy this. Where do you start? And so I tried to come together and distill some questions that you might ask yourself when going into a project. So this is what I call the pre-project questions, right? That's a very creative name. I don't think anybody else would ever think of such a widely creative name, right? Well, first question, what is the project, right? So this is just a reminder to yourself of which the article link, the blog link, the GitHub link, whatever it is, where you found these resources and why do I put this on there? That seems silly. Well, my hope is that you start off documenting what you're doing. It will help your learning process. So you start off, you document, you keep these notes to yourself. And of course, it'll probably be much more convenient if you don't just handwrite them, but like actually put them in some sort of a document or something like this, so you can click the links and see. But what is the project is important. So you're learning a cover song. What is that? What is the original song? So what is the project that you want to learn from? Right. So this is when you're trying to decide which cover song, which project to sort of start with. What is that project? And then let's start asking other sort of big picture questions. Right? Does the material, when I read the blog post, does this material apply to an industry that you're interested in? Or, maybe you're not interested in a specific industry. So this question may not apply, but if you want to go towards medicine or towards finance or towards biology, whatever it might be, does this material apply to that industry? Maybe a good place to start, maybe not, but maybe a good place to start is looking for stuff that might apply to the industry that you're interested in. So, let's say, okay, you've done everything, you've pigeonholed yourself as a medical, person. Okay, but maybe you want to try to branch out a little bit here too. So instead of asking if this applies directly to an industry that you're interested in, maybe it'll help you branch out from your current focus. You can learn a couple other tools. And here's some magic. Here's magic not in data science, in life. One thing that will help you navigate new situations is being able to create analogies to other situations. So maybe you have pigeonholed yourself in medical, right? But you work in something else. You work in some other realm. You work on city bike data. And maybe there you notice some insight, some takeaway that you can find an analogy to within the medical world. And you could say, hey, I can use the creativity or the knowledge or some of the instincts I built up somewhere else and apply it here. And so this is why it's a little bit scary to just be so narrowly focused as well. So this question B is, maybe this doesn't apply to the industry, but can it help expand your tool set or your mind or your questions? And this is a good question to ask as well. And again, remember, I'm picturing everybody having these questions and writing them down in something like a Google Doc as they go through their project by project, so they can remind themselves why they chose this project. And so hopefully, you will do that. And then another good question to ask is, and it might not be, you might not know off the bat, but it's just something to think about, is how involved will this project be? How much time will it take you? How much time will you have to commit before you're able to sort of learn something? And again, this is why I think, it's good to look through these things. Just reading a blog post, just reading an article is learning. And so even if that is the extent you take it, if you go into the code and it's way too complicated, but you understand how they were able to distill something useful from their work, that in itself is something to be learning. And so here's the question for you. How involved do you think this overall project will be to take on? And this is not just this specific project. It means which pieces of this project are you going to take? Which pieces are you going to grab off? You might try to reproduce the whole thing. You might try to just read the article and understand how they could look at this graph and pull out something of meaning, right? And so something else to consider here. Number 3 is, while you're going through this, what do you hope to learn, right? You read a blog post and you say, hey, here's what I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn a new perspective on how to look at this. I am going to learn a new impact in this way. I'm going to learn something new. But this is, when I say applications or perspectives, my goal is to make you think of the more domained in, on the softer end. What do you hope to learn that will help you live in the upper part of that diagram rather in the bottom right corner? And then also, because it is important to learn the tools to be able to do the work yourself along the way, just like it is important to learn how to play an instrument if you actually do want to I guess, be a songwriter. This is, from what you've seen, maybe as you're starting out, you understand some of this domain stuff, but you need to build up some of the tools. And so the question is, what applications perspectives you hope to learn? Maybe there's a lot, maybe there aren't that many. And to compensate for that, you at least will learn a lot of the tools along the way. And that is perfectly reasonable as well, as long as you be honest with yourself and write down on question number 3 here that what you are doing is you are using this as a tool learning project rather than sort of a big picture domain heavy project. And then finally, something else that is mostly just sort of logistic here is how accessible is this project? Can you, when you read through it, when you do a little bit of preliminary investigation, is it clear what the purpose of the project was to begin with? And if so, then write it out to yourself to remind yourself. And is it clear what the final conclusions are? Remember, you might start out with trying to shoot the moon, but only make it just into orbit around Earth, right? Before hitting the moon. I guess the moon is also in orbit around Earth, so that's a little bit ambiguous. But nonetheless, you might ask what the final conclusions were. This is of the original author or authors of this project, right? What was their purpose? But then what were their conclusions? And again, until you go deeper into it, you may or may not know that the work was correctly done, but it's interesting to look at their final conclusions. And this is, again, partially just to get your mind ready to think about why you're doing this project more than just the tools necessarily. And here's something else that I think we should all kind of keep in mind. Who's the audience for this project, right? Who's the intended audience? And it might be that you're just working on a project for yourself. But even if you're working on it for yourself, what is it that you are trying to find out that's interesting? Because that's usually a larger branch. That's usually a larger group of people or audience than just yourself. And this is something else I want you to think about. If this is, let me give you an example here, actually from a student's project we had at the boot camp. We were working on this machine learning project. Okay, machine learning, but our goal was to try to predict housing prices. Okay, and many people would try to attack this problem by just saying, hey, I'm going to try to make the most powerful machine learning predictor that I can get to do this regression problem on housing prices so I get a good score. Okay, but some people took this very nice, impactful direction. They say, hey, I'm going to try to understand what features of a house help improve the price of that house, right? What can I do? How can I inform homeowners what improvements they can make to their house so that they can, increase the value of their house if they want to sell it or what have you. Now, there's a million different ways you can create a model based on the features of the houses. But if you know who the audience is, that already informs you a lot about which features to keep. You probably want to use something like the last time the kitchen was renovated, or the last time the floors were replaced, because those are things that the homeowners can actually change, right? And so if you get rid of all the like if your sort of model performs better by forgetting all the features or the attributes of a house that the owner can change, then they can't do anything no matter how good the model is. And so understanding who your audience is also has a big impact on how you move forward. And so this is what number 4 is. And then finally, if you want to move forward with this project and you want to do more than just read, again, just reading can be okay to start with, just listening to the song, learning, singing along with it, or playing a kazoo as I would do, then that's okay. But if you want to go deeper, if you want to start working on the actual data tool side of things, are the data available? That's something that hopefully you will be able to find, and hopefully you'll be able to move forward with. Okay, so those are our pre-project questions. All right. So what about when we're in the project? So we've listed out, some of these. Some of them only went so far. Some of the projects that we're starting with only went so far as to reading a blog post, an article, or what have you. And then we decided not to go deeper. But let's say we're going deeper into one. Then what I want you to think about is, what aspects will you try to reproduce of the original project? And this is, this can be much softer than you think, right? Maybe you can reproduce everything. Maybe you're able to take their code, understand the code, run through the code, and reproduce all their results, their graphs, everything. That is awesome, right? Because then from there you can branch off. But maybe you're not there yet. And again, that's okay. That should not paralyze you from moving. maybe what you're going to try to do is read through the blog post a few times and be able to just understand how they, their mindset when they took this graph and were able to read out this one insight, right? And that is also one aspect that you could reproduce is the insight that they get from the work that they've done, even if you can't reproduce that work exactly. Something else. Well, let's talk about brainstorming while you're on the way here. When you're looking at these data, when you're looking at the work that the author did, is there something you can do? Even if you can't get into the coding, maybe there are other takeaways. Maybe you notice something from the script that there is around the coding that the author missed. This happens all the time. So maybe there's some clever insight that you can make. Or maybe there's a way to, make an improvement. Maybe you notice something that, they were going in the right direction. They hit 60% and you can hit 70% or 80%. Or, maybe more than that. And, this is again, a tool focused point, but again, we can't forget our tools. I'm not trying to advertise against the tools whatsoever, but maybe you have been improving your tools or you're trying to improve your tools and, Python, R, what have you. And in that building of tools, you notice that they did something in a less efficient way. They could have used something like a list comprehension to make it more readable. They could have removed a for loop in R, what have you. Are there little improvements or maybe even big improvements that you can make to their tool set that may or may not improve the actual insights that they get, but actually make the code more readable, more reproducible, better, just better presented or in better practice. And, seeing those changes or even trying changes, whether they work or not, can help you build up that tool set as well. And here is something that I think we should spend some time on, not us all in this webinar, but us as data science or aspiring data science professional, is thinking about, okay, this project had this audience with this purpose. Can I brainstorm? Can I just think? Can I, imagine other audiences, other perspectives that might be useful? Not that you have to flesh them all out, but it's a fun game to play. And it's fun because when you get to ask why you're doing something, you learn the how better. So instead of just reproducing the keystrokes that the original author did, if you reproduce them with a different mindset, suddenly that second or third or fifth or 100th perspective is going to help you become better at those keystrokes, are going to change the keystrokes, are going to change the questions, and you will be stronger on the tool side and on the domain side. Okay. So, right. While you're in this, right, you go a little way, you do brainstorming, you do some work towards that brainstorming. I'm kind of picturing that this while project is while you're working on this project. This is, we're in the meat of the subject here. And by the way, I'm a vegetarian, so what a terrible analogy, right? What a terrible metaphor here. But we're in the meat of the subject, and what do we have? You're working on this, and at some point in time, you might be there frustrated, you can't get any further, and you might want to ask yourself, and it's a reasonable question, should I go further at this point? And what more will you do, right? Will you keep pushing forward on the tool stuff? Is it worth it to keep pushing forward on the tool stuff? If you've reproduced everything, is there more you can do to expand on what they have done? And again, something just that is a logistical thing. How much time are you willing and able to allocate to that, right? If this is something like you have to learn 100 hours of TensorFlow, may or maybe not you have that time, and you might want to learn on, building a better foundation than trying to, again, go into a niche direction. And, okay. So if you make this decision to keep pushing forward, just do it. Don't say, I'm going to do it and not do it, right? I just don't want you to fall off the wagon that I've been building. So, building up, putting the wheels on this whole time. And, just for time's sake, I'm going to keep moving fairly quickly here, but something that you will never be upset about is keeping good documentation of your work throughout. So this is not just, this is not just commenting on your code. If you've written code, this is try to create, you have a project, create a directory, create a folder for that project. Keep these questions written up in that project. And every time you do something, make some notes, make them and keep them organized, right? So this is a good practice when you're working in teams. It's a good practice when you're working by yourself, because future you won't like now you if you make everything obfuscated or sort of impenetrable and have to go through the whole project again. So no, keeping good documentation while you work on the project is very good practice. Okay, and then some post-project reflection. Again, this is often ignored, but usually one of the more important parts is, were you able to reproduce the original results, or the pieces you were interested in? This is, again, this is, you've decided that now you've stopped. You're not going to go further with this project, at least not now. You might move on to another project. You might have several projects in the work. But these are, again, reflection questions to write down to yourself. This is your diary of your data science project. And think about why weren't you able to finish it? What more would you need to learn, if anything, to finish it? And this, once you start doing a couple projects and you start realizing, this tool, this piece, this understanding, this domain knowledge is what I needed to do a little bit more, then in aggregate, you'll start seeing where you might want to play, where you might want to put your focus on to build up those tools so that you can come back and finish off at least some of these projects where you have this need. So this is something nice to ask yourself. And then another thing after you're done is, if you are very familiar with this project, with the data, with the coding, did the conclusions, did they make sense? Did what the other author did make sense? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Were they correct? Sometimes yes, again, sometimes no. And what did you learn? This is a very introspective. What did you learn? What did you get out of this process? Write that down. Hopefully maybe you learned some new tools, maybe you learned some new insights, maybe you learned from a very simple tool that you already knew a new way to apply it, or a new perspective you could grab out. And this is something, for your own sake, be explicit here, because if you were explicit here, when you come back and you revisit these projects, you can say, this is where I learned it. Let me look at my code, my writing, my thoughts, right? My diary here. And again, this is just part of that organization. Where's your work? Or is it organized? Is it in its own folder? Are you able to go back through it? Did you make a good choice when you had it? And also just an advertisement for Git and GitHub, who are, not giving me any money for making this advertisement. I really like Git and GitHub. They are sort of an industry standard for version controls. So maybe you got a chance to practice with Git and GitHub, but even if not, maybe you use Dropbox, maybe you use something else. So this is, this is a chance to keep organized. You don't have to jump directly to an industry standard, but maybe you could, get a little peripheral skill somewhere else too. And here's another thing. If you are going to use somebody else's project, make sure that you give credit where credit is due. Right? In particular, if it's going to be public facing, if you are publishing things on a GitHub, if you don't know what GitHub is, don't worry. But if you're going to publish something online, an article, a blog about these data, about a data set, and you are basing it off, if you're expanding on somebody else's work, always, always, always here, elsewhere, make sure people know fairly where you started. And so give credit where credit is due. And then think about what more did you contribute? And finally, these last two questions, I'll bring them both up, is one, think about what future work you can do to expand on this specific project, the specific project you're working on here in this folder. What future work can you do to expand on it? But also, number 8 in this list is, what future work might you be able to find an analogy with from this project, right? Maybe you don't have to go linearly. Maybe you can go horizontally with this question. And so this brainstorming also is a way to sort of get those neurons connected in your neural network upstairs that is preparing you to take things that and not make them too specific, but be able to have this generalist approach to your data science project.